Hi guys, I will be discussing chapter 13, Between a Rock and a Hard Place by Sidman. So when I think about the chapter's title, Between a Rock and a Hard Place, I think about having to make a decision, but out of all of the choices, none of them seem appealing. Most of the time they're all kind of, negative, and it's just something that you're kind of forced to choose, even though none of them are good options. But a common theme throughout the chapter that I realized is that he talks about the inability to display adaptive behavior in these coercive situations where we actually have to make a decision or behave in a certain type of way. So in other words, being stuck between a rock and a hard place. So to start off, Sidman begins the chapter by talking about coercion and how we take it for granted. And we don't really realize that we can be on either side. We can either be the ones who coerce other people, or we could be the ones who are being coerced. He makes an interesting point about punishment, escape, and avoidance, and how they typically occur together. So no matter what your intentions are, something will cause each of these to happen in some sort of way. Like you can make somebody try to escape from you because you may have the intentions of, punishing them. So he talks about coercive power, and he gives examples such as the prison guards becoming monsters, rulers becoming tyrants, and therapists giving shocks to their clients. So in this case, individuals may like power, so they're reinforced by the way that others respond. So they keep on doing this because it's reinforcing to them, because they can bring others under their coercive expectations. So Sidman then talks about how others react to coercion in different ways. So different people can take coercion differently. But it shows that we really do have to go back and look at the person's past and how they responded to certain events, because that then shapes their behavior, which is their adaptive behavior. But at the same time, Sidman then goes into talking about conditioned suppression, where he basically is talking about everything that we've learned. Pretty much our adaptive behaviors are suppressed, so it decreases how we would often typically respond to an event. He discusses the rat in the laboratory pressing the lever. And I think for this, the important part to note is that the rat isn't getting food each time that it presses the lever. So different amounts of time elapses between the rat pressing the lever and getting the food. So sometimes it gets it, sometimes it doesn't. But the food will eventually come. So that's what's maintaining the rat's behavior. So in order to obtain the reinforcer, he'll continuously press the lever. So like I said, even if it comes out sometimes, it still has a reinforcing nature about it, because he's going to somehow get the food at some point. However, when we add some sort of aversive stimuli, such as a shock, into the equation that's out of the rat's control, after a couple of times, he starts to build a connection, and they're basically forced to deal with the noise. They can't cut it off with the lever. Nothing happens. So then he talks about adding the tone, which serves as a warning that will occur before the shock happens. So, before the rat was actually pressing the lever, the food was coming out sometimes, but then we add an aversive stimulus, which is unpredictable. The rat is less likely to want to obtain the reinforcer, which is the food. So instead of, as Sidman calls it, being productive or working towards getting the food, he describes the rat's behavior as going into panic or an anxiety-like state where he won't press the lever at all. And I like the fact that he mentions this because it shows how we as people also respond. And he talks about people not being able to work productively after the boss has inflicted some sort of shock on us. And it makes me think about when we're doing something like fun and we receive a random text message from a family member or a call, or from a significant other saying something like, we need to talk with, that for me serves as a warning shock, because typically whenever I've ever heard those words, it's always followed by something negative. So I could be at work, I could be doing something fun, and I don't want to do it anymore because this warning and this shock has happened. So, when I look at the overall picture with the rat, and the food in the beginning, something can be unpredictable and still have reinforcing consequences. such as, it's still fun stuff going on, but I don't want to engage in it anymore. And while other things can be aversive and still have a reinforcing consequence available, the food or whatever I'm doing becomes less reinforcing because I feel that the aversive stimulus overpowers the value of that reinforcer. Simon then has a section where he talks about outside the laboratory. So some things are out of our control, and Simon makes it clear that anxiety or conditioned suppression causes individuals the inability to function. So, these things are the same thing, anxiety and conditioned suppression. So he talks about people's inability to function when we encounter these unpredictable shocks, whether they come from people or nature. So we get some sort of warning sign all the time, whether it's a text, body language, a statement from someone, a weather alert on your phone, TV, word of mouth, anything. So people we interact with have conditioned us to respond in certain ways, such also the weather too. So people in different events are associated with different things, and we learn to take them as warnings. So it seems that we view these events sometimes as being greater than us and what we can handle. So we're basically coerced into responding a certain way, but as a result, we really aren't functioning. So even with the rat situation, these kind of remind me of how people that I work with have traumatic experiences, and it causes them to just freeze up. And I also think about people who even disassociate when traumatic experiences occur. So they lose all ability to function, and they just, they don't do anything. Even if we've taught them these coping skills or things like that. People are resilient, I will say that, but sometimes it doesn't work out the way we plan. So then he also talks about how the many ways that people handle these shocks. And one of the examples that he uses is that a person might find out that they're going to die soon, or finding out that you yourself are going to die soon. And then as a result, depression accompanies these signs of death. So working in the mental health field, I see a lot of these behaviors regarding depression. And usually when I see them, it's pretty much withdrawal or avoidance. So when something traumatic happens and I see these people display these types of behaviors, now I'm kind of understanding that it's suppression. So they'll probably do things that they're usually doing, like practicing hygiene. They'll brush their hair less often, take showers less often if they experience these types of events. It just kind of interrupts everything that all the skills that they've acquired throughout their life and stuff that they know that they should be doing. So it's just, at that point, it's just been interrupted. Simon talks about coercion, and that coercion is used to teach lessons, but at the same time, while teaching those lessons, we forget the effects that they have on people. Like I've witnessed in the school setting, teachers yelling at students, and whenever, after that's happened, the teacher tries to carry on a conversation with the child, and they've pretty much just lost them. The child thinks that each time that they're talking to them, that they're trying to yell at them. And this is, the same with making unfulfilled threats is also. And I think this is pretty much with the being between a rock and a hard place, because sometimes we want to say, like, I'll get you, or I'll do things, you better not do this, but we don't really have any consequences that follow behind them. And if you don't follow through, they're not going to serve as warning signs. Pretty much even with children, I see that you have to be very consistent with them, giving consequences. And now I see that coercion really isn't the best way to go about it. But, sometimes our coercion becomes action threats when we get frustrated with the kids when they start doing stuff because it gets out of control. So we have no other choice but to lean towards coercion. But this has to happen at least once or a few times for the individual to experience the conditioned suppression, where they may sort of freeze up and not know what to do because it's unavoidable. more than anything, to me, I think it elicits fear in the individuals when we do this. So another good example that he talks about is the organ transplant. So our family and friends can pressure us to choose between helping family members by donating an organ, but at the same time you'll be losing one of yours. That's another example of being stuck between a rock and a hard place. And people place these expectations on you, and you really can't escape this kind of decision because of all the variables involved. Another important point of the chapter is that when you see that condition suppression occurs, we associate it with the warning that will follow afterwards, like the example that Simmons gave with the inmates being basically under surveillance, which caused condition suppression. It disturbed me a little bit because they say that depression is common amongst inmates, but it keeps them well behaved. So it just shows how people use coercion to keep things running smoothly, no matter at what cost. I think a lot of people have the mindset that when we don't have any type of authority or coercion in place, that people kind of do what they want and there's no control. So they see the uniforms, they hear the footsteps, possibly the keys and stuff like that, and it puts them on edge. So this is the next part that Simmons talks about, which is the economics of anxiety, where Simmons describes it as being depression or hyperactivity, while both are non-productive. So my question for you is, can you think of any warning signs that precede certain events for you? Since it's hard for us to escape these contingencies and our learned behavior has been suppressed or we freeze, how could you make your suppression adaptive based on the situation that you have given? Thanks.